Several American media outlets that have been briefed directly by the White House are reporting that President Joe Biden has authorized Ukraine to use US-supplied missiles to strike deeper inside Russia. The concession marks a major policy shift by the outgoing Biden administration. Ukraine has long been pressing for permission to use US weapons like the Army Tactical Missile System, or ATACMS, and other Western-supplied weapons to hit military targets inside Russia. President-elect Donald Trump has criticized Biden's strong support for Ukraine. Well, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky did not directly confirm or deny he had received any such permission from Joe Biden as he addressed the Ukrainian people on Sunday.
The plan to strengthen Ukraine is a victory plan. I presented it to our partners. One of its main points is to equip our army with long-range capabilities. Today, there is a great deal of discussion in the media about us receiving permission for these actions. But strikes are not made with words. These matters are not announced. The missiles will speak for themselves.
Well, for more on this, I'm now joined by DW's Rebecca Ritters in Kyiv. Rebecca, let's talk about Ukraine's reaction there. It seems that President Zelensky sounded rather cautious. Why is that?
Well, I mean, as you heard, he did certainly make reference to this reported change in policy, Gerhard, by saying that the missiles will speak for themselves. But the language, the vagary perhaps in the statement there really comes down to still trying to maintain an element of surprise, trying not to give too much away tactically as to how or when, I should say, the Ukrainians may start using these weapon systems. I think the element of surprise has largely already gone. I mean, Russia has had months where President Zelensky has been pushing the West, and at various times it has looked like the West was going to agree to allow Ukraine to use these longer-range weapons inside Russian territory in the summer, in September. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was here in Kyiv, and it looked like perhaps he was going to make an announcement that the Biden administration had turned around on this policy. And then, of course, Zelensky went to meet with Joe Biden, taking that victory plan, as he just mentioned in that soundbite there, directly to the US president to try to convince him. That, of course, didn't at the time, affect any policy shift, but certainly gave warnings to the Russians. They were able to move many of these strategic targets, many weapon stockpiles away out of the range of that 300-kilometer ATACMS weapon system. So, certainly the element of surprise is gone, but President Zelensky not wanting to give any more away as to when they might start using these weapons.
So Zelensky rather cautious there for understandable reasons. But how has this news been received across Ukraine?
Well, it's certainly been welcomed both by the government and, of course, by people of Ukraine who have been hoping that this might turn around for them. They're waking up to 1,000 days since the war began today, Gerhard, and of course, many morale is low. We're seeing on the battlefield that Ukraine are really struggling to keep the Russians back. Russians are making slow but steady progress on the battlefield, and of course, they're looking for anything that might help turn the tide. They're also worried about what might happen when the Trump administration takes office in January. It's certainly, being talked about the fact that President Trump, who said he could end this war within 24 hours, might force Ukraine to the negotiating table in a very disadvantageous position. And of course, having these weapons and being allowed to use them between now and when such a time that might happen in January or after January, that they may be able to level things out a little bit and go to any negotiations in a better position.
Now, what kind of difference will the permission to use these missiles to fire them into Russia, what kind of difference will it make for Ukraine's war effort?
Well, it's really difficult to say from this perspective, but analysts, are trying to temper expectations, saying that this isn't going to necessarily change the war greatly. We're not going to see, an immediate Ukrainian victory or anything like that. But it certainly will, as I just said, help to try to level the playing field, giving Ukraine these longer range capabilities and able to to attack some of the areas where Russia are launching attacks onto Ukrainian territory. But of course, there are fears, no doubt, of retaliation and of an escalation. And that's certainly what has been preventing this decision in the past, that we will see an escalation from Russia. And they've certainly been making noises to that effect that this is, in fact, an escalation. We've heard from President Putin in the lead up to this decision. We haven't heard from him since the policy shift, but certainly saying that he would be seeing this as an escalation and that he would retaliate in kind. So, of course, there's trepidation, nerves, and we just don't know exactly how successful it will make the Ukrainians, but of course it is being seen very positively from here.
DW's Rebecca Ritters there reporting from Kyiv. Thank you, Rebecca. Well, in the meantime, a Russian lawmaker says Biden's reported expansion of Ukrainian missile use risks starting a world war. Maria Butina from the ruling United Russia Party said Biden's administration is trying to escalate the situation to the maximum while they still have power and are still in office. I have a great hope that Trump will overcome this decision if this has been made, because they are seriously risking the start of World War III, which is not in anybody's interest. Let's bring in DW correspondent Rosie Burchett in Brussels. Rosie, very strongly worded reaction there, talking about World War III. Has there been any reaction by the EU or by NATO yet?
Well, no surprises that it's seen very differently here in Europe. I'm at a meeting of European Union foreign ministers, where ministers will be gathering, and you can bet this is going to be top of their agenda, because not for the first time Brussels often serves as a coordination hub, as it did, Gerhard, just a few days ago when Antony Blinken, who's the outgoing US Secretary of State, its top diplomat, was here in Brussels for talks with his Ukrainian counterpart and several other counterparts. And at that point, Kyiv pressed once again and said, please give us permission to use these long-range missiles to strike deep into Russian territory. So you can bet ever since then, such a decision has been hotly awaited and watched very carefully. Now, these kind of decisions are bilaterally taken. The European Union or NATO as a whole, they don't decide which countries donate what and who gives permission for which type of weapons to be used where. And therefore, it's down to different member states to choose what they like. But we do know that the EU's Foreign Affairs Chief, Josep Borrell, has long called for an easing of restrictions.
Now, Borrell's position is one thing, but is there a unified position of European countries on shifting red lines by allowing Ukraine to fire their weapons into Russia?
No, there isn't. And that's normal, because different countries get to choose what happens with the weapons which they donate. But the ones to really watch here, and I think the ones that will be watched most carefully in Ukraine, are France and the United Kingdom. The UK is not a member of the EU, but has been coordinating closely with EU allies on donating military aid to Ukraine. France and the UK may follow suit after the US decision in terms of green-lighting less restricted use of their long-range missiles further deep into Russian territory. That's something which Ukrainian officials have also been asking for from those allies. Different countries don't necessarily have those kind of capabilities to donate to Kyiv. We know, for example, Lithuania has donated a couple of million euros to try and help Ukraine develop its own long-range capabilities. That's a bit of a longer-term request. Then when it comes to Germany, so far Germany has held out entirely on donating any long-range missiles. That's something which has been controversial between German coalition members, and maybe something to also watch out for in the German election early next year.
And we're now joined by DW correspondent Maria Katat for more on this. Maria, a very strongly worded reaction there, talking about World War III. Has Russia been really that surprised by this?
Now, it's important to mention that we haven't had official reaction from the Kremlin, notably from Vladimir Putin yet. We've seen some of the initial reactions from the military bloggers suggesting furious and angry at the Biden administration decisions, but not seemingly surprised by that decision. Now we understand that some military bloggers, for instance, are seemingly downplaying the permission to strike deeper into the Russian territory, suggesting that once President-elect Donald Trump will step into the White House, that decision could be potentially overturned. Now, it's still unclear what is going to be the reaction from Vladimir Putin, but previously he has already commented on such a possibility, saying that should the West allow Ukrainians to strike deeper into Russian territory, that would change the essence and the nature of the war, implying that this would already be a sort of direct confrontation with NATO and direct involvement of NATO, since Ukrainians won't be able to strike those missiles without the help of the NATO personnel.
Now, what could Russia's military reaction look like then?
Well, Putin has given already some clues a few months ago, suggesting that Russia will reinforce its air defense system, and also said that there will be some response, failing to specify what kind of response that would be. But he also hinted that Russia may consider supplying Russian missiles or Russian weaponry to the Western adversaries, that would allow Western adversaries to target Western targets abroad. Now, we also understand that Russia has been sort of planning to revise its nuclear doctrine, which is laying out the possibilities where Russian state and when can use the sort of nuclear weapons. Now, the talks about the possibility of using nukes has been voiced before by Putin on several occasions, but there are some different perspectives on that. There is one school of thought that believes that this is part of sort of intimidation rhetoric that would pressurize Ukrainians to capitulate and, make West sort of abandon Ukraine and cut off the military help. But there is another school of thought that takes those comments more seriously, suggesting that, it could potentially lead to a global escalation of the conflict.
Well, Biden's reported authorization of missile use could put the war in Ukraine in sharp focus at the G20 summit in Brazil, which begins on Monday. Well, leaders, including German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, are attending the two-day summit in Rio de Janeiro. Scholz has previously ruled out allowing Ukraine to use German-supplied missiles to strike targets inside Russia. Biden's shift in policy could reignite the debate, at least. And let's find out with Nina Haase, our chief political correspondent. Nina, Biden has reportedly approved Ukraine's use of American ATACMS on Russian territory. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has always refused to send its high-tech Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine. Could this change now?
Well, so far, Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, has consistently ruled out delivering Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine. And in contrast to other weapon systems like the Leopard tanks, where he always insisted he'd only do it if partners were going to take similar steps, in the case of Taurus missiles, we've heard him say no, full stop. And Olaf Scholz does have a reputation of being very stubborn. And he's also proudly using that label of being the cautious chancellor when it comes to supporting Ukraine. So supporting Ukraine so it can defend itself, yes, but steps that would lead to further escalation, no. And on the other hand, I think that there are arguments that he could use now to justify a change of heart. He spoke to Vladimir Putin last week on the phone. There are Russia's heavy attacks that followed that. And then there are North Korean soldiers on the ground fighting together with Russia. And of course, there's Biden's move. So I wouldn't rule it out entirely. And one thing is for sure, it will certainly reignite the debate here in Germany. And that is also a factor.
Now, if the UK and others like France join Biden's decision, Germany would be isolated. Is that better than Olaf Scholz losing face?
Well, again, Olaf Scholz is very proud of this image of not taking decisions lightly, of taking his time to weigh things up carefully, of not giving Russia excuses to make Germany a direct target. And Olaf Scholz always insists that Germany is Ukraine's second most important supporter in terms of military, humanitarian, financial, economic aid worldwide, and Europe's strongest supporter of Ukraine. And that wouldn't change. And that doesn't hinge on decisions concerning single weapon systems, he says. And if anything, when Donald Trump takes over in the US in January, Germany's role as a supporter of Ukraine will become even more important. And that will likely also not change if Olaf Scholz does not get re-elected in Germany in February. The Conservatives, who are leading in the polls, are also very much pro-Ukraine.
You mentioned the Conservative CDU there, but also the business-friendly FDP and the Greens support sending Taurus missiles to Ukraine. What do the polls say? What do ordinary Germans think?
Well, the last official poll I saw on this question is from March this year, where a majority of Germans supported the Chancellor's stance. So some 61% of Germans said that Germany should not deliver Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine. Now, that was in March. Has the situation changed since then? Russia's still not shown any sign of willingness to stop the attacks against Ukraine. And here in Germany, the voices of people demanding instant negotiations, which would essentially mean helping Russia achieve some of its goals, those voices have grown louder. So the situation has become even more desperate for Ukraine. And the parties that you've mentioned, they are more convinced than ever now that Russia must not get through with this behaviour, because that would potentially set a very bad example worldwide, that big powers can just simply go and seize smaller countries' territories.
Our chief political correspondent, Nina Hase, there. Thank you very much, Nina.